Hello, everyone. We are doing a Fellowship of the Ring discussion today with Brittany from Books with Brittany. Brittany, do you want to go ahead and say something about your channel?
Sure. I have the channel Books with Brittany, where I discuss mostly fantasy and sci-fi. I am very excited to be talking to Joanna today about the Fellowship of the Ring and discussing all the
Wonderful.
Lord of the Rings feelings.
Yay. And I thought this was kind of a spontaneous idea because just by coincidence, I decided to reread the trilogy this year. For those who don't know, I read The Hobbit when I was in high school. I read The Fellowship of the Ring. I read The Two Towers, and I started Return of the King, and I didn't finish. And then I went through many times where I kept trying to reread it, but I kept thinking I had to go all the way back to the beginning. So I'd reread The Hobbit and then I'd reread The Fellowship, and I just never got through the trilogy. So I received a lot of shame for that in the book community last year. And so I planned out, okay, I'm definitely going to reread this trilogy and all the way through to the end. So that's why I decided to go ahead and reread The Fellowship of the Ring, which happened to coincide perfectly with Brittany's reread of Fellowship of the Ring. And so this is the second time, right, that you've read the trilogy? Is that right?
Yes, yep. So for me, I read these books back in 2018, I believe, but it was also like a stressful time. I had went back to school at U of M, was pre-dental, and it was finals, and a lot of it went over my head. And I think I had very unrealistic expectations, and I wasn't valuing them for what they are. It was more so, I know these books are so well loved, and I had only read mostly modern fantasy. So I read them, I marathoned them super fast, and I appreciated them, but not enough. And I was left with this. I don't know if I quite understand why everybody thinks these are so amazing. But I knew I was missing something. And I knew that it was partially just the time in which I had read them that hindered my experience. So this year I was like, you know what? I'm doing it. I'm rereading all of them. I've never read The Silmarillion. And I actually read The Hobbit last year for the first time, but I reread that and I'm having the most fantastic time.
Ah,
So
wonderful. And Brittany did a wonderful video on her experience with this reread. So I'll go ahead and link that down below. And I loved what you said in that video about how you told yourself to slow down. It's about the journey. And it really, really is with these books, right? I mean, they
yes.
are on a journey. And it's just like if you are like out hiking, you don't want to try to rush to the peak of a mountain or something. You want to explore and enjoy the experience. And I feel like that's the best way to consume this book. Would you agree?
Yeah. And like I said, when I started Fellowship for the second time, I was kind of like, what's our end game? What's like, how are we going to get here? And then even as I'm in the middle of Two Towers right now, it's still hitting me how I can enjoy these books personally. So for me, I love how he labels and titles his chapters. It's almost like every
Yeah.
single chapter is its own like mini story within this book. And I can just appreciate like each chapter on its own as part of this greater story. And I think looking at it like that almost helps me to just enjoy every step along the way rather than rushing to see the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I felt the same way. And it's so exciting. So rather than go into, I was thinking like rather than going into what happens in the book from beginning to end, we're going to definitely touch on some points. But one of the things that I think Brittany and I both do in our channels is we love to talk about themes. And I know in this book in particular, I thought it was perfect to have Brittany as a guest because one of the major themes that really, really stuck out to me was friendship. There were many themes in this, of course, courage, which we'll touch on as well, and so many different things. But that theme of friendship and loyalty was so powerful in this. So we're just going to start off, I guess, and talk about the characters and what we thought about them. So I guess on my list, the most typical friendship of all in Lord of the Rings is Sam and Frodo. So any thoughts about Sam and Frodo?
I have a comment I got recently that is sort of making me reevaluate it. And somebody told me that they did not think that Frodo appreciated Sam that much in the first book. And it's sort of making me want to go back and reread it again to analyze, because I almost looked at this friendship while reading The Fellowship of the Ring from Sam's perspective more, I suppose. And I saw Sam's loyalty and how he would do anything to stay with Frodo and help him and protect him. And I'm just, I want a best friend like Sam.
Yes,
you
everyone
know?
does.
And while I could see from Frodo's perspective how fortunate he is to have somebody on his side that much, and I do sort of disagree with what this person was saying, because are we getting into
Yeah.
spoilers?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I should go ahead and mention that we are definitely going to go into spoilers for this.
So, at the end, when we see Frodo in his selflessness and leaving by himself, and then I think that was him showing his care for Sam, because he didn't want to risk Sam being in danger, if you know what I'm saying. So I don't
Yeah.
know. Their friendship is just, I feel like it's just getting started in Fellowship, and I can't wait to watch more of it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So, like, what was the exact criticism that person had? I don't know if I.
I'd have to go, I should have took a
Oh,
screenshot,
that's okay.
but they were just saying that they didn't think that they seemed like that good of friends in the first book. And I was just like, do I need to, and maybe this is so off
Oh,
base, but
yeah.
it just made me think, did I miss something? But and then that got me to thinking that really while I was reading, I was thinking more of Sam's side of everything in their friendship than I guess I was Frodo, because Sam's more so the one helping Frodo along the way.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. And I guess some of that might go into how you define friendship. And it makes me curious if maybe we have there's a different modern day idea of what friendship is compared to what it was back then. And that could be explored. That's interesting. I think you mentioned this maybe in your video too, but just there were a couple of parts too when Sam, when Frodo asked Sam if he really wanted to continue on the journey after seeing the elves,
Yeah.
which was so meaningful to Sam. And he still did. And I was pretty impressed with that quality of Sam.
And I love that. That like speaks right to my soul, because he was like, I can't go back now. Like I'm here for the adventure. And I'm just like, yes, that's my type of person. And even though he had already seen what he was most excited for, he's like, I'm with you. Let's do this. So I loved that.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on Merry and Pippin in addition to Sam?
I think that they are more of like the humorous aspect. Like they definitely had some times that made me laugh, but I feel like just even though it was a reread, I don't feel super attached to them
Mm-hmm.
based on Fellowship of the Ring just yet. Now that's already changing as I'm reading Two Towers, because they have more of a
Yeah.
perspective in that book, but we just get that base relationship established, like all the seeds planted, a lot of setup, and I think that it was really well done, and you can see why they're going to be an important part of this book based on the first book.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised with them, honestly. I felt the same way you did in a way I didn't feel super attached to them. In fact, especially I think Mary. I was like, I want to know more about Mary. I don't feel like I know him very well. And I think Pippin is the one who was light on his feet or something was described about him that way. But I didn't feel like I knew them, or they didn't feel quite as fleshed out to me for some reason.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they, like Sam, were super, super loyal to Frodo, and they had opportunities to leave the fellowship, and they stubbornly decided they wanted to stay with Frodo the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they talked about that too. They talked about how you could trust us. There was like this one paragraph where they talk about like you could trust us with your secret. We know about the ring. You could trust us. You could trust us for this or trust us for that, but we will not let you go alone. You
Right.
cannot trust us to let you go alone. And so that's interesting. And one thing I noticed, I was going back through my notes earlier today, and one thing that I thought was interesting is there is one scene where, and I guess this kind of gets into something I might want to touch on a little later, which is the temptation of the ring and how the
Oh
ring
yeah.
kind of strays your friendship a bit. But there is one part where I think like there's that Barrow White, no, Barrow
Yeah.
White. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Where the Barrow White takes over Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and Frodo actually has a moment when he's thinking about like putting on the ring and just escaping. And he actually goes through in his head, he's like, Gandalf will understand, and people will understand if I leave them behind. And if I just go, I couldn't do anything anyway. And instead of reaching for the ring, and it's very tempting. It's very tempting to him. It's only like a couple of paragraphs, but I reread it. I was like, oh, wow, he was really tempted there for a second to just abandon his friends. But instead, he reaches for the sword and he cuts off the Barrow White's wrist. And that was interesting. So I don't know, maybe that speaks to your commenter's point about the
Yeah.
friendship part.
Yeah, that definitely could. But those are the things that I appreciate so much because they're more of those realistic human type of emotions. Because I can't think that everybody would just automatically make the right decision all the time, the way that some of our hero protagonists are portrayed in fantasy stories where they're so noble and they always do the right thing. So I love representation of people in their mind, even if it's a split second of I could escape and be safe and leave them all, even if it's just a second. I appreciate seeing that.
Oh, that's such a good point because that happens a lot with a lot of characters in this book.
Yeah.
And I love that too. Going off from there, just to touch on some other characters, Aragorn and Gandalf. Any thoughts about them?
I think I loved Aragorn so much more on this reread for a whole lot of reasons. I don't know if I had like too many thoughts about their friendship in particular, but I just really grew to love Aragorn so much on this reread. And how, well, I do think that we're going to touch on this with some of the topics you had later, but how much that he was just invested in this group of characters in helping them, even when he was going to get nothing out of it, particularly. Like he was just here to help in a selfless way. So I don't know. I loved him for that.
Yes, definitely. I felt the same way. I love him.
I know.
When I was a teenager, I actually read this book before seeing the movie. And I remember I was kind of scared of him when I first approached him, like, or I was suspicious of him. I was like, I'm not sure about this guy. But oh man, he grew on me so much. And he and Gandalf were kind of like, they felt almost like the parents to me, like the adults.
Yeah, right.
Like they were just, you could always depend on them. And yeah, I just loved that. What about Gandalf?
I love Gandalf in every scene ever because he's just the type, like he has so much knowledge and wisdom, but then he makes light of things at certain times
Yeah.
that they're like, come on, help us. And he'll just, I don't know, kind of like brush it off. And maybe that comes from my experience of watching the movies too, because I think that's portrayed a lot in the movie adaptations. But I think specifically involving Gandalf, the friendship that I loved seeing the most was Bilbo and Gandalf reunion.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, that's true. One thing I love about Gandalf is, and it's kind of explained this, I'm sure this is in The Hobbit as well. And it's been a while since I've read The Hobbit, so it's not as fresh in my memory, but
Mhm.
just how Gandalf is an expert on Hobbit lore. And the other wizards, like Sauron, before Sauron turns bad, I guess, all the other wizards on the council and stuff, are all the people of Middle Earth. They don't seem to think much of hobbits.
Yeah.
They just they don't think much of them at all. They don't seem to have as much respect or think much of them. But Gandalf, he really does see something special in hobbits, and particularly Frodo. He sees it in Bilbo too, obviously, but in
Right.
Frodo as well. So yeah,
Would,
and I love the friendship between Aragorn and Gandalf, like the
yeah.
way that they trust each other, and that was shown many times. He seemed to feel like, like so happy and relieved. He talked about how happy and relieved he was that Aragorn found them.
Right.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
amazing.
You were saying too, just about the hobbits. I think I noticed so much. They were almost like written out of history in a lot of like the songs or things. Like people just didn't include them and forgot about them, which is ironic that there was like the huge prologue concerning hobbits at the beginning of the book that I found so interesting to read about all of the history and almost like family histories and just who was important and who accomplished what significant thing because of what you were saying about people not giving credit to the hobbits.
Yes, I love that part of the book. I just love it. I loved it when I was young too, especially the part about like their tobacco like
Yeah,
art and
I know.
just like their little habits and their ways of being. And I just love all of that so much. And I love actually, I know, I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic a bit, but I love I just thought that Tolkien's humor comes out quite a bit in like some of those parts, like
Yeah.
the part when he talks about how the backstory of the Hobbit, and he says the riddle, talks about the riddle game and what have I got in my pockets. He says experts have questioned whether that could really be count as a riddle.
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny, and like experts meaning Tolkien himself is questioning himself, and
Yeah, right,
I just thought
right.
that was so funny. But yeah, I love that. I kind of wonder almost, it seems like that part could have almost been written by Gandalf because he was the one that decided to study them and decided to take a closer look at them. And I love that. Little off topic, but I once read this book and it talked about the word respect and how the word respect comes from the Latin word respiciere, which means to look again. So to offer respect to someone is the willingness to look at them again or to take your time looking at them. And I'm
Oh,
like, that's so cool. I feel like
I love that.
Gandalf really respects hobbits, and whereas everybody else, like you said, in Middle Earth just kind of brushes them off and kind of keeps
Right.
them out of history. And hobbits, on the other hand, are kind of the same. They kind of keep to themselves. They want to stay in the Shire and kind of forget that the rest of the world exists.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Cool.
I love that piece about respect that you just said.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I still have a book with that, and it's so cool. I love it. I love looking at roots of words and things like that. And then Legolas and Gimli. Hmm.
I love both of them so much, but I think in my reread of Fellowship that I really love Gimli. I don't know. I just really do. And it's the end, like my favorite. I don't know why I love that scene so much, but Gimli is just like the most precious thing in the world to me
Yes.
after the end scene that I kept gushing about. Who do you like more? Or
Oh, it's funny because I'm doing a Q&A, I think, after I'm posting this. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it away now. I think my answer to that is also Gimli.
Yeah.
Because I just got such a kick out of him. Like, just the part when they're in, there are a couple of parts I love with Gimli, but can you remind me again about the part you were talking about at the end?
With Galadriel and the hair. And
Oh,
then the
yes.
quote where he's like, I basically the best thing that I've ever seen or experienced has happened. And now what's the point? Because
Oh,
I'm sad. And
yes.
he's like crying. Um,
Oh,
I just love the sentiment of that. And I think it's Legolas talking to him saying like, no, you have your friends and we have this mission, like we're going to accomplish, there's still a purpose and you're here for a reason, basically like cheer up and you have the memory and the memory is enough. And the human sentiment to that it's like, no, memories aren't enough to get back something that you once had. But this is such a beautiful scene.
oh, I love that. I love that so much. Oh, I'm gonna get emotional. It was just, he was so gracious. He was so grateful, and I love the way that Galadriel noticed that. They noticed how gracious he was, and it kind of changed their whole perspective on
Yeah.
doors. That was so lovely. The parts that made I just loved with him too. I think it was him that I hope I'm not getting the character wrong. It was the part when they're parting with the ring. I could have sworn it was Gimli who was like, let's see, I wrote it down. See if I could find it. Yeah, he says, faithlessness is he that says farewell when the road darkens. So he's like saying, we need to be faithful. Like he's just all full of bravery and courage.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Elrond who says, but let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. And then Gimli comes back, he says, yet sworn word may strengthen a quaking heart. And then Elrond says, or break it and look not too far ahead. So I thought that was cool, like how they were having this sort of argument. But I thought it was so cute the way Gimli was like, you just have to be really brave and strong and fake it till you make it kind of thing. And then these wise words from Elrond. I just love that.
Because I think that he is somebody that you think of as being so brave, this tough exterior, but then when we have those moments and it's like you're soft inside. Do you know what I
Totally.
mean? It's so
Yes.
cute.
And I also just adored the little argument he had with Legolas when they are in the gore or whatever of Lothlorien, when they're going through that passageway where the dwarf has to be blindfolded.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, it's just, there's this line where he says, where Legolas says, you know, a plague on dwarves and their stiff necks. He's being all haughty. And then he's, you know, and then Aragorn says, we're all going to be blindfolded then.
Yeah.
He's like being the adult here. It's like,
I know.
we're all going to be blindfolded then.
Yeah.
Be happy. And then Legolas is like, but I'm an elf. And then Gimli turns it around. He's like, you know, a plague on elves and their stiff necks or something like that. It's just so funny.
Oh, that was one of my other favorite.
I loved that part. It was just so funny. Yeah. And you could see, like, as the reader, that they're really equal. There's no better than the other, but it's just so fun. I love that. But I love Legolas too. I love both of them. They were so cute.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts on Boromir? I just put him down as an option to talk about. Definitely have some interesting scenes with him at the end.
Yeah, because he's somebody that I did not feel as attached to in the book as when I, you know, watched the movie. And I think I asked the question to some other people, like if they preferred the ending of the Fellowship in the book or the movie. And like, I actually prefer the way the book ends and then picks up in the Two Towers, like regarding Boromir. But I think it's interesting to see that like his friendships could not withstand the power of the ring, like with the temptation. Like he couldn't resist that temptation enough for his friends. Like his friendship wasn't strong enough, I suppose, or I don't know exactly. I'm not wording that how I mean to, but I think you know what I'm saying with him just wanting to get the ring from Frodo.
Yeah, I felt bad for him too, in a way, when I thought about it more, because at that point in their journey, they had gone through so much. So they probably, and he was also already kind of losing heart because he never wanted to go into the mines of Moria. And then they went through and then they lost Gandalf. And so he probably had a very weak spirit at that point too. But yeah, that was sad.
Well, and really he had this moment where he thought of what he could actually use it to do and to get power back for his people. And so, I mean, that's one of those realistic moments again, where we're seeing Tolkien write these relatable, morally gray, not just black and white scenes of decisions that people have to make, I think. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, that's true. That was such a powerful scene. And like right after it too, when Frodo kind of gets away and he suddenly looks out over this point with the ring on, I think, and he sees kind of how the land has been changed. Do you remember that? I don't know if I'm remembering that exactly right. I just remember it being very striking.
Yeah, because then that's when he's deciding, right, that he's got to do this alone.
And he's got to go. Yeah.
He can't give up, but he also sees everything bad that's happened since he started this journey and doesn't want anybody else to have to be in danger or make any more sacrifices. So he wants to go to be the one. And that's something that I think, well, this will, I guess, get into the bravery conversation later, but I don't know if I'd be as brave as Frodo.
we can go into that bravery conversation now. That'd be fine.
So I think that it's something so deliberately done by Tolkien to create these characters who are powerful and we think should be super strong and brave to be the heroes of the story. But I had written down, what did I write down? Basically, the heroes in the story aren't dependent upon their skills and their strength, but what did I write down? The moral fortitude and acts of selflessness. So the hobbits having this sense of morality that some of the other races did not, to know like what's right and wrong, and to be able to make these selfless decisions. And that's what makes them the heroes of the story. It's not their skills or the fact that they're fearless, but rather basically that that their courage requires them to face their fears and have that selflessness, and that's what makes them a hero, I guess.
Yes, no, that's beautifully put. So they have to have the courage and the self, the two kind of go together.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be like a very strong message too throughout the book.
Because we have I don't know, the hobbits constantly overcoming hardships, I guess, the history of things that they've had to. And I just love that he chose, I mean, I guess it's a chosen one trope where we get it, but he chose to have Frodo, this seemingly insignificant character who is not from, I don't know, royalty, or he's not like a big, strong, talented guy, but he's the one with the moral compass and the one who knows to do the right thing.
And I guess that's why he's kind of the chosen one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I found actually two quotes that were really interesting about that. And just this morning when I was looking through. So there was one was in the barrow scene with that part that I was talking about where he was kind of questioning himself. But it said there is a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest, most timid hobbit, waiting for some final desperate danger to make it grow. Frodo was neither fat nor very timid, indeed, though he did not know it. Bilbo and Gandalf had thought him the best hobbit in the Shire. He thought he had come to the end of his adventure, and a terrible end, but that thought hardened him. He found himself stiffening, as if for a final spring. He no longer felt limp like a helpless prey. So yeah, it's just interesting how that seed of courage is deep, deep down, even if we don't realize it, even in the like most timid of us all, that is actually, I think he's kind of trying to say it's a universal thing, no matter how helpless you think you are. And maybe, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and I think there was something, there was another part where he asks Gildor earlier in the book too. He says, but where shall I find courage? That's what I chiefly need. And Gildor says, courage is found in unlikely places.
Yeah, so, I love that line.
Yeah.
I was going to say, maybe it's such a comforting read because it makes like the everyday average person feel like relatable. Like I can be the hero too. I know that sounds really dumb, but a lot of times you can't like see yourself in bigger heroes because you don't have, I don't know, the attributes and things, but maybe that's part of why it's comforting, because it's the everyday guy who is the hero in this story.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, absolutely. It's the everyday guy. And I think like the other thing too is in the book how the support of friendship also is so meaningful for that too. He does have to do it alone, but up to a certain point, at least in this book, the fellowship is so instrumental and so important for him to find that courage within himself. So it's kind of like a stepping stone in a way.
Yeah.
One thing about that loyalty theme that I just absolutely love is that nobody in this book is forced to go on this journey. Like everyone chooses to go on it. And that was so powerful to me. One of the things that I also loved was, I think Gildor at the beginning of the book talked about how elves seldom ever give advice, and that advice can go wrong even with the most wise people. And I think that was amazing to me, because I don't feel like I never see that perspective nowadays, like in fantasy or in life. It's like people just love giving advice and don't think twice about telling people what they should do, with how they should be. And
I love that so much too, because just in my everyday life, that's something I think about so much. I try to be really careful, like never to give unwanted advice, because I know I don't like unwanted advice. And sometimes, even if I know the right thing, if I get advice I don't want, it's going to make me do the wrong thing, because like in spite of the advice sometimes, and like you said, it's just not something that stated that frequently. And I really loved that too. So that stood out to me when I was reading.
It really did. I mean, even just like the Council of Elrond, and which was a chapter, by the way, I actually loved more on my reread than I did the first time that I read the book. But just there was such a state. I mean, every character in that council felt very stately until we come around to Frodo and Bilbo speaking up. I just love that. I love how like they suddenly just bring back this sort of lighthearted feeling back in the room. But one thing that's just so amazing is that they both speak up and Frodo comes to that decision on his own. But nobody says, you need to do this, Frodo, you're our only hope. Well, they kind of sort of do insinuate that he is their hope, their only hope, but they never say, they really do respect his sovereignty and his decision making.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of goes with what I was saying about foresight and free will, because a lot of the things, I guess, seemed almost like they were predestined to happen, with Frodo being in company of Bilbo and Bilbo having the ring before, and now it's his. So it's like there's a lot of these things, or foresight of other characters of things to come. So it almost feels like there's predetermined events that are going to happen in this world. But like you said, in this world where there's a destiny almost, these characters are still choosing. And I think that's such a good conversation, because I hate like, oh, if it's just meant to be, it'll be, or just if things are supposed to work out, they'll work out. Like, I don't like that. It's like sometimes you have to take action and make choices. And I think this book's a perfect example of that, because he could have said no, or any one of these characters in the Fellowship could have chosen not to go along, but they were all an important part of the group.
Yes, that's such a good point. And like what you said about foresight, that's something that's really interesting in this book, is that, well, one, there is a lot of foreshadowing. I didn't realize that. That was something that really stuck out to me. But one thing about foresight that's interesting is that there are many people throughout the book, like Gandalf especially, and probably Gildor and other, I think Lothlorien, Galadriel, I think, they talk about how things could either go good or bad. There's that you're walking on, I think there's even the saying that you're walking on a knife's edge. And but at the same time, like, even though there is foresight, there is still room for it could go any way at the same time. Like, it can go either way, but also the way it plays out isn't totally fixed either. Like, I think just bringing back like the very beginning, when Frodo talks about how he wishes that Bilbo had just killed Gollum. And Gandalf says, no, it's great. It was actually probably for the greater good that he didn't. That act of mercy might have played a better role for the goodness of all. And Gollum might still play a role in this all. Like, there's always talk about like, this person might play a role in this, or this might play a role in this. And it might be for the good, and you can't judge. You can't know for sure that it won't be for the good of all. I don't know. There was just, did you notice that? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and especially now, like, as you're saying that, it's making me, I don't know, like, think about some things in a different light almost. And I really appreciate that, because it's almost like Tolkien wrote these things, but meant for you to think about them more, and not just see it as in, this is what has to happen, this is what's going to happen. Like you're saying, it was more letting you do your own thinking. And even with some of the themes and thought-provoking statements he made, it just makes me want to know so much more about Tolkien, because I love the messages that he put in this book.
Yeah, there were so many. And, even with all of that, something that stuck out to me is that Gandalf, as wise as he was and as much sort of foresight as he had, he still made mistakes. And he owned up to that. He's like, it was a mistake to go back to the Shire at this point, or it was a mistake to let Gollum go at this point. And he even admitted himself he wasn't certain about everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that was amazing to me, because I think it's easy to sort of create this sort of archetype of Gandalf as being just this all-knowing, omniscient, perfect wizard, but he definitely was imperfect and owned up to that too. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I agree. And I think that's something upon my reread that I'm really noticing, because I think before this, I think I thought he was like the all knowing, like always does the right thing that he knows should be done. And like reading this, I'm like, nah, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know.
And
So,
I think it might be a difference too when you come back to it a little later in life too, than when you're younger. Because I know
mhm.
when I was younger, I mean, I think that's a process everybody goes through in their life, is when they're younger, you tend to look at, or when you're in school at any level, you tend to look at teachers or professors as being, they know everything.
Mhm.
And there's
Yeah.
almost like this cognitive dissonance when like, oh, they don't know everything and they can be wrong. What?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
when you become an adult, you realize, oh, nobody knows everything. Nobody's perfect. And then I think that kind of played a role in how I saw Gandalf. As much as I love him, oh, I love Gandalf so much. But I think it's neat to see his imperfections. I think that doesn't make him any less lovable. It made him more lovable, actually, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I will just say too, the scene with him falling, it like hurt just as bad the second time watching him and like make the sacrifice for all of them. I don't want to say, I don't know, people laugh about spoilers for Lord of the Rings, but I don't know if you want me to not allude to anything else coming in the future. But what happens to Gandalf in this book was just as devastating the first time I read it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know why, but I know the outcome of everything, but I'm just still like
Yeah.
feels
It
heavy.
it did affect me a little more the first time, for sure,
Yeah,
because I didn't know it was coming.
right.
And it
Hmm.
totally threw me off. This time I did know, just knowing it was coming didn't quite impact me as much, but it was still sad. I was like,
Yeah.
no, don't. Something that I was thinking about that came up for me was like this idea of forgiveness and mercy. And I touched on that a little bit about offering how Bilbo was merciful towards Gollum, along with like forgiveness and mercy, he was telling the truth. And I'm just going to bring this back to Bilbo because he lied about how he got that ring.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think obviously, he had the ring for longer and it affects him more than it affects the others. I like that we get to see that. I like his imperfections and even his interactions with Gandalf in the beginning, just when they're still in the Shire, and his interactions about trying to give up the ring, but the honesty in the situation of him being like, no, like I'll keep it. And then he doesn't have it and he's like, I want that back still. I know that's not exactly like what you were saying there, but I think we see that a lot with Bilbo.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I actually really liked how at in the Council of Elrond, when he comes forth and he's like, okay, I'm going to tell you all the real story now. I really appreciated him coming forward. And there were a couple of moments too with Frodo where I think it was like with Tom Bombadil, where he puts on the ring and tries to sneak out, and Tom's like, I know you're there.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so fun. It was so cute. And he was like, ah, just kidding. Just going back to friendship, I just put down as my last quote there, like that. I just love that part where the password for the door was the word friend
Yeah. Say
in
friend and enter.
Elvish. Say friend and enter. Yeah, just beautiful. Mm.
And
Any,
I think that that's something that I wasn't expecting as much upon my reread, was the overall positive message that this book had, and the overall feeling of, I don't know, just a feeling of goodness in humanity and in people that this book gave me. And I don't know if it's Tolkien's writing or the time in which it was written. I'm constantly reminded of doing the right thing, of being in good company with friends, and choosing to do the best that you can with what you have. I don't know if you felt like that reading this as well, but there would be some of the darkest moments, and the lines the characters would say were so impactful to just remind us that either there's always good in people or good in the world, or think life's not always fair, but we, basically do your best. And I was kind of shocked. I didn't remember that from my last read. And that's like the overall lasting impression I have of this book, is just how Tolkien really wanted people to think about doing the right thing and the good in people and in friendship, I believe. I don't know
Yes.
anything similar to like what your overall lasting impression of the book was, but
Yes, I think so too. Like, I just not underestimating anyone, actually, not underestimating people, not underestimating yourself. And yes, that inspiration towards goodness was
Mhm.
definitely a huge, just it was it's so well done in this book. I think like the message of loyalty and friendship, I think that those things are tropes that kind of that people love to mess with nowadays. But like by turning people bad, and what you're loyal to and everything like that. But it was just a beautiful exploration on friendship and values, and just knowing what you stand for. And like you said, that courage there's also like the courage to tell the truth and to stand up for the truth. I
Right.
guess like one last scene to kind of mention was just that scene with kind of, maybe I shouldn't end with this, but but the scene with Sauron, the wise or the white, and how he talks about how color is so much better than white, and white is so boring, and innocence is so underrated, and it could be corrupted. And then Gandalf says, but then it isn't white anymore if you put
Right.
color on it.
Right.
Uh, so just understanding that sometimes there is, and I guess like that is a big thing, is that there is always temptation to stray from that path.
Right. Right. I think too, maybe because my I have a little bit cynical view of society in this time that we live in. And I always try to like help people as much as I can, or surround myself with good people. And so for me, just watching this world where it's so rare, I think, this group of people to help one another, even if they get nothing out of it. Like, I'm even noticing that with other characters and things in the Two Towers. And it's just
Yeah.
so rare, I think, to find people who do things or provide help with asking nothing in return, nothing other than just to help somebody and for the good of that person, even if they can't benefit from it. And I think that is a huge part of this whole story and all these characters coming together. I think that's partially why I like it so much, because I liked seeing people do things for the greater good or to help out a neighbor, even if they don't benefit.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. That is perfect. Oh, I love that. That's beautiful, Brittany. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for watching. And if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. We'd love to hear from you about any thoughts on the Fellowship of the Ring and what you took from it. Thanks again for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.